So today we're going to talk about what does it mean to know a language. What do you think it means to know a language?
Like being able to speak fluently with someone. Or
Okay.
read.
And what does fluent mean to you?
So maybe you just know it so well you don't have to think about it. You don't have to figure out in your head how to translate something, for instance.
Okay. One of the things I usually talk about when we're talking about what does it mean to know a language is that traditionally we talk about language being grammar.
Right.
So in other words, if you have the grammar and you have the words, you're able to do it. But of course, that's not really what it means to know a language. To be able to really know a language, you need to know who says what to whom, when, where, and why, and how. So that one sentence kind of includes, being both formal and informal. Being able to, so part of, the joke being if you know a language well, you're able to insult people appropriately and not insult them when you don't need to,
Right.
which is one of the things that you always do with a new language. So one of the things that's really important about being able to, what does it mean to know a language, is culture. Even things like body language. Knowing a language means not just the words, but when to use them. So, going, yo, dude, appropriate social context, not so much in work, in most contexts. And knowing a language, so this is why when people learn another language, often traditional classrooms just focus on the words and the grammar, but they don't necessarily focus on how do you do this. And of course, this is important when people are, for example, on cruise ships and traveling. Your Google Translate app can give you some words, but it doesn't tell you, am I doing this appropriately? Am I talking to a boss? Am I talking to a friend? Am I talking to a child? How am I supposed to do this? So, for example, with Japanese, Japanese is a language that has a lot of social context issues that actually influence the words that you're supposed to say. English is a little bit more flexible, but still, do you use Dr. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, Ms.? What is the appropriate language if you're doing requests? So, for example, in English, we talk about, we use, if we want to be more polite, we use more words. Would it be possible to? In other languages, it's done by adding bits and pieces or the type of term you use. And, again, in Japanese, it's hard to be impolite. It's possible to be impolite, but it's difficult to be impolite because you're always sort of saying, and thank you. And different languages do that differently. So one of the things that's important in learning languages is not just the words, but how do you communicate it? And that also includes body language. For example, a lot of people think that gestures are universal. Pretty much they're not. There's gestures that are positive in one culture and not positive in others. How you say things, even things like, depth of bowing, handshakes. In some cultures, a good strong handshake is important. In other cultures, a good strong handshake basically is aggressive.
Right.
So, part of learning a language is knowing what words to use when. So the issue being sort of appropriate. Also, the context. So again, if you're in a business meeting, there's a different level of formality than if you're at a party, even if it's exactly the same people. One of the challenges for learning languages in traditional classrooms is that you don't necessarily have that context. So, for example, in Canadian French immersion, the teacher is higher status, the students are lower status, so it's hard for them to learn the tu vous distinction because it's always vous to the teacher and tu back to the students and tu to each other. Where if you're learning, which is one of the reasons why learning a language in immersion situation can be really good, because you actually learn and see how these connections are made. And one of the things that I always tell people on cruise ships is that a great way to learn these things is actually just to observe people. You can call it watching other people or call it being a cultural anthropologist. The second one sounds much more fancy. But basically, on ships and when you travel, you see people from all different cultural groups interacting. And that's also one of the challenges is that when when you have multiple groups interacting, that you have multiple sets of rules as well. So, once you know your own, as people travel, they found out they usually learn more about their own culture, because they discover that the rules that they're used to don't work in this new setting. You can imagine in the hospitality area and tourism, how complex that gets, because you have multiple people from multiple different groups interacting as well. And so, as I said, one of the things that I often suggest to people on the ship is, observe, try to figure out what rules are working. And that means not just how people address each other, but what they say and what they don't say. One of the things that's, for example, true with Australians is Australians tend to be pretty informal. And so we did some research with graduate students. And, for example, it would be normal for an Australian teacher to say, you might want to read this. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a second language learner, you might want to learn something is a vague suggestion.
Right.
But from the perspective of the teacher, that was actually a direct order. And that's when we did research, that's what we found. So that's that how, what was actually said, how is it understood, directness, level of directness is very cultural, how the words are used. So even when you have everybody using the same language, say for example English, they're using it differently. And so, so that's sort of the fundamental aspect of learning a language is once you go beyond the words and the grammar, you have to learn how to use it. And in fact, one of the best ways to do that is to spend some time in the country or in an immersion situation.